the men's rights movement is a spectrum like any others, and I think there are, and the way I look at the development of the men's rights movement is they came out of the men's liberation movement of the 1970s, which was feminist inspired, and Warren Farrell was at the center of that, of the men's liberation movement, and we're talking like early to mid 1970s. And the men's liberation movement struck a really, or attempted to strike a really nice balance between two opposing positions. And the one position is the feminist position, or the feminist observation that men hold power and privilege over women, and that women are oppressed in a patriarchal society. And the other position is that men are hurt by masculinity, or some of the things I was talking about a little early on, that that men have problems with health problems, and men have lower life expectancy, and our relationships are injured, that masculinity is really a kind of box that closes men in very unhealthy sorts of ways. And those two observations, that men have power and privilege and that there are costs of masculinity, are kind of contradictory points, and they're in this creative tension with each other. And the men's liberation movement, I think, was attempting to and a lot of it was sort of driven by therapists, people who were involved with working with men in therapy, but who were inspired by feminism at the same time. And they were trying to sort of put those two things into play with each other, and keep them into some sort of dynamic play, and organize men around the idea that equality between women and men was good for men too. Because it was going to make us more healthy and happier and better lovers and everything, So, so Warren Farrell was right in the middle of that. And in the late 70s, early 80s, some of the you could almost see the men's liberation movement. You've seen those pictures of an amoeba that's a single cell, and then immediately it starts to kind of pull apart and squeeze in the middle, and then it separates, and it's two separate organisms. This is sort of what happened with the men's liberation movement, is that there were these debates within the movement that some men, and this is mostly men with a few women, I guess, some men really wanted to emphasize the costs of masculinity, and pull men in to create more sort of healthy conceptions of masculinity, and better relationships and better fathering and all of that. And other men who are more politicized and more aligned with feminists, by the time you get to the late 70s, it becomes much more politicized in a lot of ways. Anti-pornography movement among women, so the men who are more aligned with radical feminists increasingly in the mid to late 70s felt the need to emphasize a lot more the men's power and privileges part. Let's organize politically. Let's not sort of sit around feeling sorry for ourselves because we have lower life expectancy, or because we can't cry. We were told we couldn't cry. Now let's hug each other and cry. So the radical feminist men sort of kind of started making fun of that part of men's liberation, and the attempt in the early 70s to kind of fuse those two creatively started to kind of pull apart, and you started to see this polarization of some men becoming more politically radicalized and moving into the camp of a lot of them that I've been interviewing lately, who are doing anti-violence work, anti-rape and sexual assault work, and so forth, and men who had more of a therapeutic orientation and were thinking more about helping men develop more healthy and happy lives. And some of those who pulled in that direction and started to form a men's rights movement developed a really strong anti-feminist orientation to them, and not all of them. And that's one of the things I learned by doing some research on the men's rights movement, is that it's not like a lot of movements, there's different tendencies within it, but some, I think, men in that movement still retain somewhat of a feminist orientation, in the sense that they believe equality between women and men is really the ultimate goal, and they see some ways that women are still underprivileged in society, and then that there are others on the other end of the continuum who who are so angry, and I would say just misogynist. I think they hate women, and not just feminism, but they've come to hate women. And some of them are coming out of the fathers' rights movement, and they're very angry personally at what's happened to them in terms of court decisions about custody, and they've gotten involved in fathers' rights organizations that have helped them to kind of direct their anger towards the legal system and towards what they see as unjust laws that hamper fathers after divorces, and to me, a lot of that type of men's rights organizing has really gotten has become very negative and divisive and doesn't. Well, I'll just say I don't think it's. I don't think that a lot of their assumptions are correct to start with, too. I think that there's no doubt that there have been some men who get just screwed by court decisions and custody cases. But I think when you look at the broader patterns, it's still the case that in intact heterosexual families with kids, women are still doing the vast majority of the housework and child care, and there's a lot of sort of father absence and lack of participation by fathers, some of whom I think then after divorce happens end up suddenly wanting equality, as fathers when they haven't really been participating equally as fathers before. So to me, it always kind of swings back to the feminist perspective of how we need to push for full equality across the board, including before divorces. And if we have that, then we might expect more symmetry after divorces happening. But so anyway, the men's rights movement by the 1980s, I think, takes on more of an anti-feminist and in some ways anti-woman orientation, becomes a locus for certain groups of men to express their anger towards women, but that's not to say that all men who are attracted to, for instance, a fathers' rights organization or to men's rights hate women, or that they're in it because they want to push back the clock to the 1940s or something like that, or to the previous century where women didn't have the right to vote or something. It's not like that, for the most part.